It's time for another edition of Saturday with Seniors, brought to you by FCCB's local offices in Wellsboro, Mansfield, and Blossburg. Serving our community for over 150 years, it is FCCB, proudly sponsoring Saturday with Seniors. And our guest this morning in our studio, we have Bill. Bill, actually, what's your last name? I don't have it in front of me. I'm sorry.
McCawley.
Bill McCawley joining us here. Well, I'm just meeting you today for the first time, Bill, so nice to meet you in person. Thank you.
To meet you, too.
Thank you for coming down. You're going to be turning 77 next month.
That's correct.
And I wouldn't have guessed you to be above 67 looking at you, so you're doing something right in your life. Let's talk about your life and where you were born in the early days of your life and what your family did. So going back to where you were born.
I was born in Brooklyn, New York. My dad happened to be working in the naval shipyard down there. I came into the world. We were down there for probably a year and a half. And then my family moved to Pittston, Pennsylvania. My grandfather and grandmother lived in Pittston. Didn't know my grandfather on my father's side of the family. He came here to mine and was killed in a mining accident when my dad was about 7. I did know my grandma Mary on that side of the family, but we lived about 3 doors from the Morosky family. My grandfather, Peter Morosky, my grandmother, Mary, Bopsy, and George. I grew up in basically a Polish neighborhood, Polish and Czechoslovakian people, so I pretty much ended up loving their foods. Mm-hmm. I'm very fond of Polish foods, Polish customs. Surprisingly, I speak some Polish.
Mopały Kopalski there or whatever. You speak Polish, right?
Yeah.
I lived in Chicago for 2 years, which is the second largest group of Polish-speaking community in the whole world, other than Poland.
Well, when you grow up with it, I mean, it's spoken every day by the neighbors and everything, and you catch on to it. I know a couple of years ago, we had, my wife and I were working at the Corps of Engineers campground, and there were 2 couples came in from Brooklyn, New York, that were immigrants from Poland. And they're outside the window speaking Polish. And my mom was still alive. When she was alive, we spoke it quite frequently to keep it alive in my head. I start to lose a lot of it now. But it was surprising that I could communicate with these people in Polish. And a couple days later, one of them stopped me, and he wanted to know how many languages I had to speak to work in that building. So it was kind of comical that I could relate to them that way. But growing up, I went to a Catholic school. It was a Polish parish. I was an altar boy. The 7:30 Mass in the morning was always in Polish.
Yep. It's kind of odd, but my dad is the same age as you, grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and he was also an altar boy. And his family's Polish as well.
Right. So. and surprisingly, I mean, I always relished Christmas Eve. The custom of Wigilia that we had where a meal was served and it had to have a certain number of dishes. I believe it was like 11 or 13. No meats. I remember around 5 o'clock in the evening, George would go out into the yard and watch for the first star to appear in the heavens, and he would come in and announce dinner, and the family had to be there. Basically, you were expected to be there, and his family was a big family. And we sat down at the table, and they had a blessed wafer called a płatek. Popke and George would get up and go around the table, wish everyone well. And then they would start with the oldest son or daughter and work their way around the table that way. And everybody broke bread with one another. And after dinner and the dishes were done, we sat in the living room singing kolędy or Polish Christmas carols, exchanged gifts that night. And then we all went to midnight mass. And then when we came back from midnight mass, it was always sit down and have some of the homemade kielbasa we had, because now we could eat meat. And
there
Grandpa's homemade horseradish.
12:01 a.m. Break out the kielbasa.
So it was a great way to grow up. I appreciate the fact of how I grew up now.
I'm starting to realize, as I'm interviewing more people, that traditions and family get-togethers and time spent together with families, unfortunately, is not what it used to be. And that's sad, I think. Like people were expected to be, and they were there. Right. Now you try to get a lot of families try to get people together for Christmas, and half of them don't show up, or they don't go the distance, or people don't even take time to call mom,
I have 5 children, and we pretty much try to get together on holidays. More so now, it doesn't work out that way. Working schedules. I got one daughter works for the CDC, and sometimes she can't get free. She's down in Atlanta, Georgia. I have another daughter that does cancer research in Vanderbilt University. They do try to get home. They'll usually make one holiday or the other. But family's always been important to my wife and I, and our family is pretty tight that way. Yeah.
That's good. So you talked about both your grandfathers worked in the mines. You lived in the Scranton area for a while, coal mining area.
That's correct.
I was looking back, and this is kind of interesting. 1950, there was 75,000 people in Pennsylvania working coal mining. 1955, about the time you'd probably remember, it was half of that, 37,000. And do you know how many it is now? 5,000.
5,000.
So it went from 75,000 when you were, 5 years old in kindergarten down to 5,000 now.
Well, I lived during that period. The Knox mining disaster happened in my lifetime. They were mining too close to the Susquehanna River. They were under the river, and they had gotten themselves too close to it, and the weight of the river caved the mine in. And I remember that disaster. Ice was on the river coming downstream at that time, and there was a giant whirlpool. All that was going into the mines.
Wow.
It was pretty much the end of the mining industry in the Wyoming Valley because all those mines were interconnected underneath. And I remember Lehigh Valley had a spur that they had run out there, and they were running boxcars in there trying to plug it up somehow to get it to stop.
Yeah.
And them things they went right down the drain. I mean, it was a terrible disaster, but that was
people die in that disaster as well?
I remember my mom was making punchkis for the rescue workers, and my dad and I were running them down, and I do remember one woman standing on a porch, and we found out afterwards that she had 3 members of her family in there. If I'm not mistaken, I think they might have lost about 13 miners in that disaster, but it pretty much flooded the entire valley, all the mines, and did in the industry.
Yeah. I was reading a little about the coal mining history because before you came in, I figured I'd just kind of fresh up. I had 18,000 people in Pennsylvania died in coal mining accidents, men and boys, before 1950, when the regulations started getting a little bit safer, but obviously not safe enough at that point. But it's hard to imagine 18,000 men and boys dying.
I remember as a boy, there was a siren they had. When that siren went off, it stopped the town. I mean, the community knew what it meant. It meant they had a disaster or some kind of accident in the mines.
And you can remember hearing that, huh? So how old were you when you lived in Scranton at this time?
Oh, I lived in Pittston, actually. The town of Pittston. I went to school in Duryea. How old was I? I was a freshman in high school when I went to St. John the Evangelist in Pittston. And then my sophomore year, which would have put me about 15 years old, my dad had retired and we moved out to Wyoming County, Lake Cary and Tunkhannock. Yep.
So as a kid, what type of chores did you have when you were a younger kid? Did your parents start giving you chores at a younger age?
Yeah. When I was small, I do remember I had to bring coal.
Everybody used coal then, right? Yeah. I mean, if you were in Scranton not using coal, you were...
had coal, and you had to make sure the pails were filled up so there was coal to put onto the fires. Actually, my mom had some real bad illnesses. And my sister and I mean, we would sit and do dishes. We learned to cook at an early age. I know we'd go down with Bopsy once in a while, but there was times we were at home, and we became very, very close that way. And surprisingly, we had purchased a dishwasher, my wife and I, for the house. And we put it in, and we had it in about a year, and both of us felt that we rather stand there and do dishes together and communicate than have that dishwasher.
Yeah.
So we actually took it out and put it out front, take it. I gave it away because I enjoyed with the kids, my kids, standing there doing dishes, communicating, talking, things like that.
Communicating is really another one of those things that's a dying thing, unfortunately, just standing, enjoying good conversation with somebody. So did you get an allowance as a kid? They give you a quarter every week or something for doing your chores?
I remember Bopsy used to, once in a while, she'd slip us a nickel or a dime, my sister and I, when we were going to school in the morning. And as far as an allowance, I really, in my mind, I don't remember something like that. I do remember that I would get odd jobs. One thing my parents did teach me was to save. I know if I got $1 somewhere, and we used to sell Legion tickets on Saturday morning, and you sold a book of tickets and you got a dime out of it, and we might get $1, run around selling Legion tickets to people. And when you came home, my mother would take 50 cents and she'd put that in the bank for me, and I had 50 cents to spend. And it did teach me to manage money, something that I think
that's very, very important. And I think a lot of, especially, when you were younger, there weren't credit cards around, right?
No, you either paid for it or you didn't have it.
I mean, some stores you bought on credit if you had good credit, but for the most part, you handed people cash or maybe a check.
My dad worked away in Jersey and came home on weekends. He could make more money down there, and we could live on it better in Pittston. But ironically, he didn't have an automobile. My mother had so many major surgeries that he didn't have insurance for, and my dad paid his bills. And he didn't have a car till he was about 50 years old. And what the car he got was an old Plymouth. It was probably, by today's standards, something that should have been junk, but to him it was a pride and joy. And then after time, he worked up through automobiles because my dad was a hardworking man and put in a lot of overtime and stuff like that. I always appreciated the fact that the small salaries they made. I remember after my dad passed, I found some of his old pay stubs at the house and looking at them for the time period, when a man was making $3,000 a year, but the important thing was he was paying for my sister and I to get an education in a private school. They valued education that highly.
It sounds like they valued their kids and their family very highly,
yes,
too.
They did, yeah.
My mom told me stories, too, about like her dad would give up getting shoes for himself if the kids needed shoes.
I know my mother and father did
anything that the kids needed was always first.
You don't see a lot of that today.
No, certainly not. So your dad didn't get a car till he was 50, so did you have a car before your dad had his first car?
I didn't own a car until I was ready to go I was probably a senior in high school. Mm-hmm. My dad was retired then. I know I had gotten a job with a farmer that I was his herdsman, $100 a month in the wintertime and $150 a month in the summer. We look at that kind of money, but I had
that was $150 a week,
month,
not a week, a month, $5 a day, kind of. Well, farming is every day.
If I transformed that into $1 an hour,
yeah,
probably someone today would tell me I was crazy. I worked on a truck farm when I was a youngster, 10 cents an hour, Martinelli's, and we would go out and sucker tomatoes and tie them to stakes and weed, pick onions, radishes, stuff like that, 10 cents an hour. When I moved to the area in 1967, the summer of 60.
By the area, I mean this area, Tyler County. Yep.
In 1968 and 69, I had some truck driving experience. Summers in college, I was working down in Jersey for Union Carbide Corporation, and they had a relatively huge plant. It was square miles inside their fence. They had their own stoplights and railroad crossings and everything. And I was taught to drive a yard tractor down there. And when I came to the area, Reed Doan in Knoxville needed a driver in the summer for his feed trucks at the Purina Mill. So I worked at the Purina Mill, and that was $1.80 an hour in 1967. And the following summer, I got a raise to $1.85 an hour. So, you contrast salaries, and you do what you got to do to keep your family afloat, so to speak.
How often did you go out to eat when you were younger? Did your family go out to eat, or did you make all your own meals? Because that also seems to be a common thing. Going out to eat in the 50s was not too common.
Yeah. If we went on a fishing trip, my dad and I, or we might stop at a restaurant, or at that time they had like a bar and a grill, they'd call it. We'd stop somewhere like that for a sandwich and a Coke or something. But for the most part, we always prepared meals at home and ate at home.
Yeah. Did you go out for entertainment at all? Anything that you spend money on? Roller skating, movies?
A little bit of movies. But that was probably it. Fishing in the outdoors was probably our entertainment.
Yeah. So you came to Tioga County, would you say 1967-ish?
1967. Well, 1965. My wife and I, we were just dating at that time. We were in college together, and we wanted to see the Grand Canyon, and the strip in Ansonia was all tore up, and they were detouring traffic. And if I remember the detour, I know it was like a forever detour, but we came out of Mansfield into Wellsboro, and they sent us out 287 to Tioga and north to Lawrenceville.
Holy cow. That's quite a detour.
Across 49, and if I'm correct, I think we had to go all the way to 449 out in Gold to go south to get back on 6. Well, we were traveling up the valley, and I was a little tired, wanted to stretch my legs, and we had just come out of Westfield, and I pulled off on a lawn right after it was a Longhorn restaurant, and I pulled off on the lawn. I was walking around the car, and I looked out there, and there was the Kawaneski Valley High School, and it was beautiful. It was set back against the mountains, and the landscaping it had was just gorgeous, and this big field in front of it, and I looked at that, and I told my wife, I said, that's a beautiful campus. I said, that person got to love to teach at a place like that. And then 2 years later, when I was interviewing for jobs, if you go into the entrance of Kawaneski Valley High School, you don't drive across the front of it on the highway. You go in from the side. Mm-hmm. So I went into that school, and when I got hired there, I had no idea where I was. But I got hired as a football coach also, and I was walking across the field with practice one day, and it hit me where I was. I was in a place that I actually thought would be a beautiful place to teach.
Sure.
And that was kind of a unique situation, and I will tell you that when my wife and I first drove up the valley, it was so depressing to us that we looked at one another and we said, 2 years, and we're out of here. And it's a beautiful place to live. It's a beautiful place to raise your children. I have become a lover of the valley. I love the people around the valley. It's a beautiful place to grow up.
It grew on you, huh?
It's home.
So you were a teacher in
Kawaneski Valley, yes.
How many years and what did you teach?
I put in 36 years. I taught biology. I was head football coach for, I believe I had 20 years in.
Wow.
And I was athletic director, too, for probably about 10 years.
So quite involved with the school.
Still am.
And how often do you run into students that remember you from school?
A lot of times.
All right. I'm sure a few are listening right now.
Yeah.
You mentioned your wife before here, that you've been married to...
55 years.
That's what I'm seeing right here, 55 years.
We met, when I moved to Tunkhannock, we were in the same grade together.
Let's mention her name first of all here.
Joyce.
Joyce.
So
and, I'm sure she's listening.
In our junior year, late junior year, we started dating. Her dad was a dairy farmer over around Harvey's Lake, and we started dating. We dated through high school. We went to Mansfield together. We dated through 4 years in Mansfield.
You say Mansfield College?
Mansfield State
University?
College at that time.
Yeah.
Then we got married August 20th of 1967.
And she was a teacher also?
Yes, she was.
And where did she teach?
Well, she started out teaching at Greenwood, New York, and that's probably what brought us to the area because we could both find a job close together. She was a home economics teacher. Mm-hmm. She also had credentials to do kindergarten. So she left Greenwood and came back over to Pennsylvania, and she taught up in Northern Potter School District in Ulysses. And then when we started to have a family, when we had the first child, Lisa, we pretty much both taught, and she had a babysitter. But when you get the second one, it starts playing on you that, are you paying for a babysitter and stuff like that? But I think both of us really felt like mom needed to be at home with the child. And it was not a bad decision. She has done a fantastic job. When our kids went to school, they were so well prepared. And the end results, I have 5 college-educated children.
I'm looking at this here. She's got a doctorate in molecular biology, cancer research.
Yeah, that's my oldest daughter, Lisa.
Vanderbilt University, Lisa. So that's quite an impression.
Yeah.
Lori is a math teacher at Kawaneski Valley. Your other daughter, she's still a teacher there now?
Yeah, she's still teaching there.
And what's her last name? Miss people know about?
Hyler.
Mrs. Hyler, okay. And you got a biochemist now, Amy, your daughter, for the CDC.
Yeah, she works for the CDC in Atlanta, Georgia.
Angie's a special education for Corning Painted Post. A very respectable job right there.
Yep.
And Adam's a math teacher in Corning Painted Post. So
that's correct.
So I'm looking at this. So you had 4 girls and 1 boy. I can guess who didn't get the hand-me-downs and who did. But, wow. And then you got 8 grandchildren, and you have some great-grandchildren?
2 great-grandchildren.
Wow. What is it like having grandchildren and great-grandchildren?
I'll tell you what, I've been a blessed man in that respect, especially because some of them have lived real close, that we have more contact than you do with the ones that are far away. But when the ones that are far away get back to the area, we make up for it. The things I've enjoyed doing in the outdoors were basically, hunting, fishing, trapping. I was an outdoor person. And surprisingly, like I have one granddaughter, Madeline. She teaches down in North Carolina now. But from the time she was 7 years old, she was my right-hand girl right up through. She ran trap line with me. She hunted. She fished. All my grandkids that have lived around here have killed their first deer and their first buck with Grandpa. So we do get to spend a lot of times together. Right now, I have only 2 grandsons that are left that are close by. My one grandson, Seth, is down in Millersville University, and he gets home. It's not like we get together, but when he does come home, we fish and hunt. And then I got one up in Corning, New York, Mason, and he's 15 years old, so he only has a few years left, and he'll be off to college. But I've been blessed to have the time and the health and everything to enjoy my family. I truly do enjoy my family.
That's wonderful. So let's talk about a few of the things when you first came to Tioga County. Did you have a party line on your phone?
Yes, we did.
Because that area was one of the last areas to still have party lines, from what I understand. And people, the younger generation is like, what is a party line? Sounds like fun.
Well, it's something where you get on and you pick up the phone, and if there's somebody on it, you put it back down. Sometimes, if it's an emergency call, you had to butt in and tell them you had to make a phone call so you could get on the line.
Basically shared a phone line.
Yeah, you were sharing a phone line.
So how would you know if you got a call? Your phone would ring a certain way? Is that how that worked, if it was coming to your house? Or...
I believe the ring sequence was into the phones, like, double ring or triple ring.
R3, whatever that,
But that I can remember that way.
Yeah. You remember some of the businesses that were around that aren't here now when you came here?
Oh, yeah. We had a lot of businesses that were in the area. You go into Westfield, we had the Dollar Saver was big in that town at that time. The grocery store is still there. It's under different management.
The tannery was still going strong when you came to town? The Westfield Tannery?
The tannery was still going strong. We had Gleason's Western Auto. We had Frankie's 5 and 10 cent store. There was businesses right down through the business district, barber shops. When we moved there, we lived in Knoxville for 1 year, and even Knoxville had 2 hardware stores, a drugstore, 2 barber shops, a restaurant. They had Lugs was a department store where they had sold food on the first floor. Or it was like a market, and second floor and the third floor was like yard goods and housing supplies and things of that nature.
Yeah. And
they're all gone. You got some businesses trying very hard to survive, but they have to compete with outside
changing world.
Yeah.
I mean, since you came to town, we got a Lowe's, we got a Walmart, we got about $72 Generals in town.
Right.
We got internet purchasing, and if people don't support their mom and pop businesses, and the mom and pop ones, I got a passion for them. They're the ones that you see on the back of the Little League shirts. They're the ones that you see.
I was just going to say, they're the ones that when it comes time for a yearbook ad or something like that, they're the ones that get hit and always come through.
Yeah, and they come through, and percentage-wise, the small businesses give on average 2.5 times as much per dollar in back to their community because it is their community. So I'm glad we still have some. We got to support them.
Yep, we do.
Believe it or not, we're almost out of time. Anything closing thoughts? Anything you want to share?
I love the area. I know that. I think I've told you that already. I have a true love for the area. I have burial plots in this area, and I'm going to be planted here. When I first came here, I was a flatlander, and it took many years for me to somehow shed that with the local people, although Wyoming County has some pretty steep mountains too.
Yeah.
But great place to grow up, wonderful people here. It hasn't changed much in the 50-some years we lived here.
That is one thing I love about here. I grew up outside of Boston, and I go back, and it's twice as many people, twice as many traffic lights, none of the businesses, just nothing feels the same.
This time of year when I wake up and look out my window and I see the mountains all colored, I appreciate it more than looking across the street at a high-rise with a bunch of windows.
Absolutely. Well, Bill, thank you so much for joining us on Saturday with Seniors.
I appreciate being here.
We want to send a thank you out to our sponsor, FCCB's local offices in Wellsboro, Mansfield, and Blossburg, serving our community for over